All right, folks. Okay, we got two more left right here. Two more chapters in all of AP US history right here. So we are more than halfway through our final unit right here. This one is going to continue that political idea of the fallout of the Nixon and LBJ years right here. This is going to lead to a huge push in conservatism in America and really form the basis of the modern day Republican Party and see kind of where it came from right here. So we've already kind of covered a little bit of the context behind it right there. All of this social unrest that we saw in the 60s and all the economic crisis in the 70s here. So let's kind of see how that all plays out right here. All right. So, first things first, we saw, let's take a look at Jerry boy right here. So, Gerald R. Ford, he is the vice president here who was barely put in office a month or two before Nixon resigns the presidency here. So, no one really know who he is right there. That says Nixian instead of Nixon right there. That is awfully embarrassing. Um, so, Nixon, he leaves the job unexpectedly. Ford doesn't really not really that known to people. He is going to pardon Nixon because he doesn't want his presidency to be about Nixon. But in doing so, he ensures that Nixon avoids all consequences here and basically admits that he's doing this here, basically admits he's guilty here, because to accept a pardon, you have to admit that you are guilty. It requires an admission of guilt effectively. And so we see that Nixon is ultimately going to face no consequences for Watergate here, and Ford is just kind of forever known as the guy who let him off the hook. His foreign policy, it's a disaster. He gets a bunch of Marines killed by the Khmer Rouge. Okay, fine. There's one shining example here. It is the Helsinki Accords. The idea that, hey, maybe human rights should be a priority here for both the communist world and the capitalist world right here. Let's take care of our respective zones. Cool. Uh, Domestic policy, it's a bigger disaster here. He doesn't know how to solve inflation here. He creates this weirdly erotic propaganda campaign, whip inflation now. Look it up. I won't go into any more detail here. So, Ford doesn't really know what he's doing here. But he is going to be the guy they run again in 1976 for the bicentennial. And that takes us to his Democrat challenger here, Jimmy Carter. So, Jerry, he's going on. You want 4 more years of this. But Jimmy Carter, he is a evangelical. He's a born again Christian here. And because of the fact that he is religious, he is not from DC area. He is the governor of Georgia, but he is not connected to federal politics at all. And that he's kind of running on this idea of maybe lowering taxes, maybe balancing out the federal budget right here. He's checking a lot of boxes. Many feel strained by the taxes on the Great Society, and many people don't trust the Republicans or the Democrats right now. But he does also get this huge religious group of voters to vote entirely based on their faith. And that is going to be an absolutely key issue further down the road on this same PowerPoint slide, actually, here. So Carter wins. But once he's got the job, despite being a really nice guy, like probably the single kindest soul who's ever been president, he unfortunately doesn't get a lot done domestic wise. Yes, he's got some good progressive social stances, but what we end up seeing is that his solutions to stagflation are not very effective either. It's only peaking under him. Gas is being rationed. He gives a speech that gives everyone depression called the malaise speech. So the economic woes are really not going well. There's almost a nuclear meltdown under his time in office here. But he did put solar panels on the White House. So that's pretty cool. Anyhow, the biggest stuff involving Carter is going to involve his foreign policy. If you get a question on the AP about Carter, it's probably going to be about that. And it's really a mixed bag. He is trying to do human rights stuff here. Like, we are going to continue this idea of de-escalating things, like with China. We established full relations. We're going to not fund dictators in Latin America anymore. That's cool. We are going to give the Panama Canal back to Panama because it's their land. That's cool. And if we ever do directly intervene, it's for the sake of peace. So, the shining moment of Carter's presidency is the Camp David Accords. He is organizing peace talks between Israel and Egypt and bringing them together to end the ongoing conflict that was started when we started supplying weapons to Israel. But what ends up happening is we see that they're able to work out a peace treaty here involving ending the fighting, giving some land back, diplomatic recognition. It is an objective win for the Carter presidency here. And it's a sign that, hey, maybe this level of just trying to be a decent person is a possible long term goal. One, for peace in the Middle East, and two, for all of this foreign policy here. But Carter has his detractors. All of this idea here of talking things out with the communists, giving away the Panama Canal for effectively nothing, it's really making him look like he is weak on communism here. And so, there's a few examples you can point to. Even that idea of not backing Latin American dictators. We see that we supported a dictator in Nicaragua. Once we stop supporting him, the country falls to communism, the Sandinistas. And so, you could make the argument under Carter that communism is actively spreading because of his weakness, not being tough enough on it. And that takes us to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. What ends up happening here is effectively just like how we wanted to prop up Vietnam so that the whole region doesn't become communist, the Soviets are worried that because communism is secular, that these Islamic rebels in Afghanistan might turn the country anti-communist. And so there's a fear that they have to go prop up Afghanistan to ensure that the Middle East doesn't become anti-communist. Ultimately, that's going to end up really bankrupting the Soviet Union over the years because they're going to be stuck in this war for 10 years and just send a bunch of money out of here. But importantly, we see that we were initially trying to talk things out, have another round of those SALT treaties here, SALT II. But once the Soviets go boots on the ground and send military force, that's no longer an option. So the biggest blunder of Carter's presidency is going to cost him the election here, and it involves the Iranian hostage crisis. You may recall back in Unit 9, through the CIA, we put the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, on the throne because he's a dictator, but he's not communist. What we end up seeing is he's there for 26 years, but eventually resistance is growing, and he has to leave the country periodically to get treated for cancer that no one knows about. One of these times when he's out of the country, we see that the rebels rise up here. A Shia Islamic government is going to take over Iran. And so effectively, the Shah is in exile now. Carter, under pressure from his advisors, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger, who's still around, he is going to invite the Shah of Iran. Carter will bring the Shah of Iran to the U.S. to undergo cancer treatment, saying it's the human rights thing to do, but it's also the anti-communist thing to do. That is going to evoke the wrath of Iran as a country here. And supporters, as you can see down there, will storm the U.S. embassy and take everyone inside hostage for 444 days. This goes on during an election year. During the election of 1980 here, Carter is having the biggest blunder of his time in office here. Several attempts don't work. Our economic responses are weak at best. Carter looks weak to the whole world here. And so, what we end up seeing, I'm going to go ahead and pause on the results that I had to explain the election of 1980. As Carter is floundering domestically and in foreign policy here, we have this conservative movement reaching its full peak right here with the California governor, Ronald Reagan. Sorry, former California governor. Reagan is campaigning on this idea of the Great Society being too expensive and an example of government overreach at its worst. Let's shrink the role of the government here and have it do less. That could fix stagflation. Since, after all, this idea of a government being involved under Great Society, that's kind of been disproven here because of stagflation here. We thought those two things couldn't exist at the same time, an interventionist government and high employment and inflation. Why are we doing all this if it's not working? But we also see the push here of this Christian majority here, this Christian conservative movement, the New Right, is kind of harnessed by the moral majority, a political group, to make these evangelical Christians vote Republican. And so they focus on this idea of bringing culturally conservative values into society and into politics. And we see Reagan is going to campaign on that idea right there, being anti abortion, being focused on things like school prayer. And all this here is refreshing to many of the viewers at home, especially the voters in the South, who feel disillusioned by all the chaos of the civil rights era, by the gains made ending segregation, by the youth movement and the anti-war movement. The 60s and 70s were a chaotic time right here, and they want a return to a simpler time. So, as Carter looks as weak as ever, Reagan looks stronger than ever. Reagan's going to dominate this election here. Before I forget here, to wrap up the Iranian hostage crisis, as Carter is for sure losing the election, he still quietly ends up negotiating to secure the release of the hostages. But the hostages actually arrive in America 15 minutes into Reagan's presidency here. So, 15 minutes in, Reagan gets a huge victory here because he's the one who freed the hostages in the eyes of the public right there. So, what else does Reagan actually do? Well, the big thing to understand about him is on day one, he's going to argue that what we've been doing for the last 50 years is incorrect here. He's going to say that the New Deal and this interventionist government are the problem. They're not the solution to the problem, they are the problem. Let's stop doing New Deal economics, Great Society politics here. Let's return to supply side economics here. Now, the term we use is Reaganomics here. Effectively, it's laissez-faire. Let's get out of the way of big business, and that way they have all the prosperity they need to build better research, create more jobs, invest in the American economy, and therefore all that wealth created by big business, the wealthy will invest in America, and that wealth will trickle down to everyone, like a beautiful cascading wine dish right there. So, first things he's do, he's going to cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans here. And we will see over his presidency, the tax on the wealthiest 1% is going to be about a third of what it was before that in the Great Society. Big business does not have to comply with a lot of regulations here. And in doing so, they ostensibly are saving a lot of money. Welfare, the federal government is going to slash the role of things like Social Security, Medicaid, things like food stamps, that Great Society stuff. Instead, that is now the state's responsibility or your own. Because if you're on welfare, you're lazy and you just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and just figure it out. So he's also a notorious union buster because if you're in a union, you're communist. So what we end up seeing here is, for a lot of different reasons here, partly because of some of these gains here, stagflation is going to cease. We see that inflation is going to stop in this area here, and employment is going down. And although there's an initial recession here, during Reagan's presidency, the economy noticeably rebounds, and people feel like it. What that ends up happening is then we see that these ideas are considered to be the permanent default now. So really, Reaganomic style economics is going to be the default for pretty much until the modern day, actually. But what we end up seeing is many of Reagan and his advisors here, they're going to focus on this idea of cultural conservatism here. So they will push for ideas like school prayer. They will push for anti-abortion values. They will reframe political or socioeconomic issues as moral failings. For example, if you're on drugs, it's not because you're coping from the fact that the welfare state just got dismantled and now you're barely coping with ends that no longer meet. No, if you're on drugs, it's because you have weak willpower. You just need to learn to persevere through. Just say no. That's what Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife, is going to say during this time in office here. Just learn to accept that you shouldn't do drugs ever. If you do drugs, it's your fault. And also, we're going to send a lot more police to put people in jail. There is going to be a bipartisan compromise here of immigration here, because ever since those quotas under LBJ ended, there's now a huge spike in Latin American immigration, including illegal immigration. So It's a little gain. It's compromise for liberals and conservatives. Liberals, because they like immigrants, they think that it's just about wanting a better life. We just give a blanket just pardon here. Just a couple million Americans. If you were here illegally, congrats, you're a citizen now. But for the conservatives who want to look tough on immigration here and protect American jobs because immigrants are taking our jobs, we see that they are going to make it illegal to knowingly hire undocumented workers, and they set up the green card system. So, a little win for both of them right there. But hey, it shows Reagan was willing to compromise on certain issues right there. Hey, look at that. What about his foreign policy? What we're going to end up seeing is that Reagan's foreign policy is kind of defined by his relationship with the USSR. During his first term, he was aggressively anti-communist here. We're going to get rid of the détente era here, and we're going to focus on rollback. We are not just going to contain communism. We are going to shrink communism here by undoing it in countries that we can. We're going to invade countries like Grenada in Latin America to overthrow its government here because we're worried the Cubans are invading, or sorry, influencing them. Uh, we are going to start up a massive new arms race here because we have to be better prepared than the Soviet Union here. Peace through strength. And with that in mind, we will see that the goal is to spend more than they do. And we will see that's kind of one of the reasons why the Soviet Union is going to go bankrupt. And on that note, that takes us to what happens in Reagan's second term. Now, you could argue there's a lot of reasons why this sudden tone shift right here, going from making jokes that we're going to bomb Russia 5 minutes from now to suddenly being the guy that says tear down this wall and actually shaking hands with Gorbachev. You could argue maybe it's because Reagan got shot in his first term and maybe that, gave him a come to Jesus moment. Maybe it was the fact that Gorbachev is younger and more open to reforming the Soviet Union and does so with that idea of like perestroika, a little capitalism for the boys, and glasnost, a little criticizing the Communist Party for the boys. That's a fun little slip right there. But regardless of who necessarily started it here, Reagan and Gorbachev are going to see the bring about the official end to the Cold War here, at least the beginning of it. It won't actually end until Bush. But what we end up seeing is that this is a major, major win right here. After decades of fearing an imminent invasion or nuclear war was happening, finally talks are being had, disarmament is happening. It's a huge win. Lastly, here, there is a real low point here for Reagan here involving something called the Iran-Contra affair. You may recall that Nicaragua became communist here. Well, we support rebels for that group called the Contras here, but they do a little bit of cocaine smuggling. They do a little bit of ethnic cleansing. We are going to stop supporting them with the Boland Act. Reagan doesn't like that. He likes these guys. We're going to get around that act by secretly selling missiles to Iran and sending the profits of that to the Contras with no one knowing. This goes on for years, but when it finally comes out, it's a huge scandal. A man named Oliver North and his secretary are kind of seen as the ringleaders, but they shred all the evidence so that nothing ever is actually found. And ultimately, Reagan is a little slow. He doesn't understand what's going on. He says he doesn't recall any of this here. And it will later be revealed that he was likely suffering from dementia at this point in time here. He's had Alzheimer's. But because of Ollie North being kind of the ringleader, and because he and his secretary, who got married in 2025, shredded all the evidence, there is not enough to convict him here. So Reagan, despite having a low point here, will avoid impeachment. And that kind of takes us to his overall legacy here, because he's probably the most polarizing figure in modern day politics here. The conservatives of America absolutely love him. Like this Iran-Contra affair did not affect his popularity in any meaningful way here. He just said sorry on TV and people loved him. And they called him the Teflon president for that reason, because nothing sticks to Reagan right here. Nothing he could say or do could impact his popularity with the people who already like him. So they would argue that because he was tough on communism, the war ended under him, the economy got better, these Christian values were embodied, and above all, there was just a general feeling of optimism in America in the 80s here because of all these other reasons that they considered one of the greatest presidents of all time. Meanwhile, The more left-leaning crowds, they see him as everything wrong with America here. They see him as the fact that he dismantled this welfare state as perpetuating systemic inequality, uh, broadening the gap between rich and poor, because the trickle economics did not trickle down, and many people are just consolidating wealth at the very top as everyone else, shrivels up. Uh, this idea of being tough on crime led to massive arrests, destroying public education or health institutions, making them way less effective and way more starved for resources. And the last one we covered in class was Reagan and his supporters in his White House here deliberately ignored the AIDS epidemic because it was simply seen as either undesirable because it mainly affected gay people, or actually preferred seeing it as God's wrath against this perverted lifestyle. So, also, he got rid of something called the Fairness Doctrine, which allows for biased news sources on either side right there, which perpetuates this political polarization and therefore the legacy of people like Ronald Reagan. Look at that. So, regardless, conservatism in America is now the default. Both parties have shifted to the right because of Ronald Reagan. His impact will be felt for decades here. And as we're going to see in the next chapter, our final chapter of AP US history, we'll see how the Democrats respond, not by going further to the left, but by trying to meet this new rightward bound group in the middle. All right? We'll go ahead and leave it there, folks, for right now. Thank you for your time. And I will see you all in the next one right there. All right. Peace out, folks. Bye bye.